many of the seasoned and more mature faces you might see in the audience are our advisory board members, and their purpose, many of whom are alums, is to help our curriculum and our programs continue to grow and enrich your lives. So if you're an advisory board member, could you either stand up or raise your hand? And so thank you folks for traveling all the way out here. We're glad that you're here with the students, and now I'm just going to turn it over.
All right, speaking of seasoned professionals, it's my honor to introduce our next and never before seen speaker, Brian Lawler. A little bit about Brian Lawler. He started his career at Cal Poly in January 1969 as an undergraduate in graphic communication. He graduated in 1975 and he stayed in San Francisco, first as a business owner and eventually as a Cal Poly professor that we all love and know him as. So, no further
Thank you, Julianne. And Carla, don't you have something?
Yes, you and I have something.
Oh, we have something.
We have something
Yeah,
special.
something special.
Where's Malcolm?
Malcolm.
Near
Malcolm, come on up here for a second. Today is Malcolm's birthday. So, congratulations.
Thank you.
He's 39.
Again.
Again.
Seems like this happens
So in the key of
every
X.
year.
It does happen every year. Yes. So in which key should we? Let's put Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Malcolm. Happy birthday to you. Wonderful, wonderful. Okay. So this is a presentation which I am going to try not to cry. So I'm not doing well. I'm going to try not to be dramatic either. It's entitled I Wasn't Planning to Stay and Mindless Acts of Vandalism. So as Julianne just told you, I arrived here in January 1969 as an undergraduate, and I have to tell you how I got here, and I know a lot of you know this story, but that will bring us to the not necessarily mindless acts of vandalism, but an act of vandalism that I'll tell you about. This is a picture of me at the age of, I think I was 12, and at the upper left I'm using a headline typesetting machine, and in the upper right I'm making a paste up, and in the center at the bottom I'm using a Frieden Justo-Writer typesetting machine. And this was at the offices of the Montclarian newspaper in Oakland, California, where I was born and raised. My mother was the editor of that newspaper, and I had, I guess, observing from these photographs, free reign. And so there was a photographer there, a guy named Joe Robertson, who enjoyed taking pictures of me. Later in my life, I thought this may have been a little odd, but my mother was always very careful. She let Joe Robinson take me out for photo sessions, but she always accompanied from a distance. And I think maybe she was a little worried. Joe is a really sweet man, but I think my mother was a little worried about just worried about him. We'll just leave it at that. Anyway, there are some wonderful photos in the collection. One time he photographed me and put me inside of a bottle. And it was he did it using non-digital technology. He used negatives and superimposed images under the enlarger. And he made quite a convincing image of me inside of a bottle, which is quite charming. I didn't include it in the show. But anyway, that's my background. I started my first printing company at the age of 11. I called it the Teenage Print Shop, which was not entirely honest. But I only had a few years to go until I was a 13-year-old and could legitimately call myself the teenager who ran the Teenage Print Shop. And in that printing shop, which was in the basement of my family's home in Oakland, we had the Chandler and Price 8x12 press that is now downstairs in the museum. I've never put a plaque on it. I should probably put a plaque on it because my family, my brothers and sisters and I donated it to the museum when our parents died. And so it's a nice thing. And whenever I want to print, I go down and use my press because it's really my favorite press. And it's why my left arm is considerably stronger than my right. And I did a healthy little printing business starting at the age of 11, which is kind of cool. And this is me at 14 years of age, and 1964. And if it didn't have a motor and smell of gasoline, I wasn't interested. And that was a phase that I went through. that and purple shirts, which was a very strange thing related to West Side Story. And I was, this is actually it's even funnier. I grew up in the Catholic Church, and you have to choose a confirmation name. And so I never told my dad, who was my sponsor at confirmation, what name I had chosen. And so we got up and the bishop was anointing us and doing the stuff where you do your confirmation. And the word Bernardo came through the Latin. And my dad, as he put his hand on my shoulder, was looking a little strange. And on the way back, we were walking very quietly back up the aisle. And he said, "Bernardo?" And I said, "No, it's named after you, Dad." His middle name was Bernard. And he bought that. Which is pretty interesting. Anyway, I was going through sort of a difficult time at 14, I'm sorry, I keep saying 16. At 14, and I had trouble in school. I took one grade twice in order to get it right the second time. And my parents were concerned about me for good reason. Most students went on to high school, but I got to stay and do that last grade a second time. Something I don't brag about, by the way, but you just heard it, so it's interesting. So my mom read an article in the San Francisco Chronicle about Cal Poly's School for Country Printers. And so she and my dad dragged me down here, and this building was relatively new. It had been occupied for a couple of years. I think it was first occupied in maybe 1960, 61, I'm not really sure. Construction started in 57. We have the drawings. And we know the building from some of the photos we have of the building. It was finished in 1960, and it was probably occupied in 61. And we got here a few years later, and I took a tour with my parents, and this brings me to the historic act of vandalism. We were standing in the bindery, and I was moved by the experience of, sorry, here we go. I have to gain my composure. Here we go. Anyway, I was moved by the tour of the department, and I was standing out in the bindery with my mom and dad, and I turned to my mom and I said, "I'm going to go to this school." And so this morning, before you woke up, I came over and I painted an X on the floor of the bindery in a historic act of vandalism. No, I got that wrong. It's an act of historic vandalism. So now there's an X on the floor of the bindery where I was standing in 1964 when I decided to go to Cal Poly, and it will last as long as you don't scuff it. It's painted in fluorescent green, which is the only color of paint I could find this morning at 6 o'clock, and a very simple stencil that I cut in the plate making room. Anyway, so that is now a mark, and again, you're welcome to scuff it off if you like to, but I meant it quite a bit to me to do that. So, what have I been doing here at Cal Poly? And remember, the title of the presentation is "I wasn't planning to stay." I thought that I would come to Cal Poly and I would graduate and I would go away and do something. But of course, I had no idea what it was, but it definitely would have involved printing. I just didn't know exactly what it would be. But in the process of learning from the teachers here, I encountered a number of really terrific professors, one of whom is in this photograph. I'm at the podium there on the left. This is 1970, a year and a quarter later. To my right is Mr. C. Harold Gregory, who, a really, really fine man who thought my spelling was really awful. And we have switched roles. Now, of course, I'm the one who thinks other people's spelling is really awful. But I did learn how to spell. Anyway, Mr. Gregory was one of my favorite teachers and mentors, and he was a wonderful man. And Bruno, could I trouble you for a copy of that 60th anniversary book that is right there behind the sink? This is a cool thing. There's a photo in here. I was trying to find the electronic version of it this last week, but I couldn't. But there is a nice photo in here of the faculty right here. And these were the people, to a person. They were all here when I started at Cal Poly. And I was looking at it the other day and realized that I was talking about some profoundly wonderful men. And among them, Mr. Gregory, who really did make a difference. But as I moved on through my career, I took courses from all of them, of course, and we did have a period of oddball department heads. We had a man who, well, when I started, there was a man here who was department head who mysteriously one Thursday night disappeared and never was seen again. The sheriff's department came around the next day looking for him, and we didn't know where he went and didn't ever find out, which was rather interesting. He showed up, though, for the 60th anniversary celebration that we had out at Cuesta, and it was quite amazing. And he came up to me and slapped me on the back and treated me like I was his old buddy, which was really strange because he used to say mean things to me when he was here. He was our department head. Very, very interesting, odd man. But anyway, we went through a period of several department heads who were really strange. One of whom lit his office on fire with his cigarette. And I went in to see him moments after the fire erupted in his garbage can because he had accidentally dropped a cigarette into the trash can. And it was in the room over here where Lindy's office and Donna's office is, and Rachel's. And I walked in and the flames were this high, coming out of the garbage thing. So I grabbed something and smothered the fire. And his name was Guy Thomas, and he was a really cool guy, a little rough around the edges. But he walked in the room and he said, "What are you doing, Lawler?" And I said, "I was putting out the fire in your garbage can." He said, "Okay, what do you need?" And so that was sort of typical of Guy Thomas. Almost every machine in the building had cigarette burns across the top of it because he would leave burning cigarettes sitting on top of the machine, and they would burn back and then burn through the paint. So you could always tell where Mr. Thomas had put his burning cigarettes as they went. Anyway, he was a nice guy and a decent man and a very honest man. And then he was followed by a man who printed his own PhD diploma and told Cal Poly that he actually had earned one. And anyway, he didn't last long. I don't know where he went. But anyway, then after that, after numerous years of sort of odd, flaky department heads, there was this man named Dr. Harvey Robert Levinson who arrived on the scene and stayed for 32 years as our department head and is a great credit to this department and changed everything. I had graduated, of course, by then. But anyway, back to this photograph. Somewhere in this photograph are pretty much all the faculty members on the staff of the printing department, as it was called, and then it got changed to graphic communications with an S. Or no, it was printing engineering and management. And then it became graphic communications with an S. And then the following year it became graphic communication without the S, and it is still to this day. I've been working in the Shakespeare Press Museum. Let me back that up. I was the second curator of Shakespeare Press Museum in 1970 as a student. And it was a natural for me because I already knew how to operate the machines and do the typesetting and that sort of stuff because I had learned that since I was a younger person. And I served as a curator, I think it was just 1 year, but I don't know. I don't remember. And during that time, we had linotype machines upstairs, and we had a linotype machine in the museum that was there until a couple of years ago. It was the one that had the color-coded cams that was done as a senior project by a student whose last name was Chapman, and I don't remember his first name. Anyway, it was a cool thing. That is now done at the International Printing Museum in Carson. But we replaced it with a new working linotype machine a couple of years ago. And then another thing that I've done in the museum recently, which brings me back to this topic, I bought a used Heidelberg windmill printing press because the only windmills, well, back when I was a student here, we had a whole row of windmills, but I somehow managed to get through my Cal Poly career without ever having put ink on a Heidelberg press. We only used them for embossing and stamping and die cutting. And I didn't know you could. I mean, I knew it was possible, but I had never done it. And so a few years ago, as a faculty advisor of the museum, which I have been for some period of time, I do not know how long, because I don't know when I started. It was when Tom Golio retired, so I took over from him, and it's been a long time. But I decided that to complete the museum, we needed a new Heidelberg press. So I started looking on the used market. And I found one down in Los Angeles that I purchased for $2,500, which is probably a little bit too much for the machine, but I had to go get it, which was even more interesting. And I brought it back here, and then it took 2 years to get it into the building. and it took another year to get it to the door of the museum, and it took another year to get it inside the museum. And I say this not because anybody was dragging their feet figuratively or literally, but it was too heavy and too complex a task to get it inside the museum because you don't have a forklift on the first floor of the building. The lift that we have down there weighs about 3/4 as much as the Heidelberg. I did try to pick it up, but the fork goes up and then the forklift tips over, so it didn't do much good. So I did manage to get it into the building, and we had electricity delivered, and I spent 2 years restoring that press to working condition. It needed a lot of TLC. It had been at a plant in Canada where it was being used for foil stamping and embossing and die cutting, and they never oiled it for 25 years. And so I had considerable amount of maintenance, bearings, and all the bearing surfaces had to be at least checked and replaced as necessary. And then the entire register system, the precision register system, had been damaged by hacks who didn't know how to operate the press. So I had to replace all that. And then this last fall, in my first ever printing job on the Heidelberg press, meaning seriously, the first time I'd ever put ink on a Heidelberg press, I decided to print a 5-color precision register job, which turned out really beautifully. And I'm very proud of it. But it turns out that after I restored the press, I knew everything about it. I knew exactly how it worked, and I knew exactly how register was done, and so on. So now this is a new machine. It's for the first season running in the museum. It's a 1953. It's called a Black Ball. It's the 100-year anniversary press. It's down there. It runs beautifully. We'll be running it on Friday evening at the reception if you'd like to join us. But again, my point, I always come back to the point, was that while I was working on that press, I needed to know a lot about it. And I found this book, which is the original Heidelberg Manual for the Operation of Heidelberg Platens, and it's a beautifully printed 100-page or so book, 124-page book about the Heidelberg windmill, and it includes setting up the precise register pins and all the wonderful things that the Heidelberg has. And on the front of this book is a sticker that says James H. Babb, Printing Department, Cal Poly. And it turns out that Jim Babb was my letterpress teacher when I was a student here. And I thought, oh, this is special. This is really going to give me the knowledge that I need to, I've got to work again on controlling my emotions, to fix this press and get it going. And Jim Babb, I have to tell you, this is a man who, with freshman students, we had a whole row of Chandler and Price presses and some windmills. And we didn't use the windmills in that class, but we used the C&Ps. And these were electrically powered, hand-fed printing presses. And he had the patience of Job. He would walk us through Make Ready, and our final class assignment that quarter was to do Make Ready on an envelope. An envelope has 4, 3, 2, and 1 thicknesses of paper. And we had to print a halftone across the face of an envelope and not be able to tell that it had 4, 3, 2, and 1 thicknesses of paper. So the Make Ready, and Jerry's back here nodding, he knows what I'm talking about. This was nearly impossible, and it meant cutting these pieces of paper that we used to call ledger. It's onion skin paper that has a basis weight of 11 pounds. It's so light that it's quite literally like an onion skin. But we would cut these with X-Acto knives, and then using gum arabic, we would stick the pieces of onion skin to the inside of the tympan so that we could make ready and then print. Anyway, Mr. Babb was a big guy, a little taller than me, stout, but he always wore a businessman shirt and a suit coat, but not a necktie. You could not get this man to lose his temper. He would never raise his voice. He never cursed. He never said an unkind word in my hearing, ever. And no one who knew him ever said an unkind thing about him. And I thought that what I might do, ceremoniously here, in another unkind or historic act of vandalism, I'm going to write my name in this book. I'm going to put it back on the shelf. So 50 years from now, somebody might take this book out and use it to learn how to use the Heidelberg windmill. Okay, so that part is done. So what have I accomplished in all these years? Well, the first thing I accomplished was, I don't know what I think I was president of Matt Pike Pi, which explains why I'm up there with Mr. Gregory. And that year we made a sheet cake to honor Mr. Gregory, and I don't remember what we were honoring him for, some tenure in our department. And his wife, Zeta, is wearing blue there to the right. She was a sweetheart. This man was so kind, it's just unbelievable. But the second thing I accomplished was in the guise of a fictitious character that I called Phineas Balthazar Higbee. I was the taker of the census in 1970. We won the Cal Poly Royal Grand Prize for our events going on in the department, including the museum. We did some fabulous stuff. We had all the presses that would running. We had typesetting demonstrations, and we had the museum cranking out little cards and doing all sorts of wonderful stuff. And I was dressed up in this vest here with a badge that said Phineas Balthazar Higbee, taker of the census, and we printed fake census reports that are quite funny. There are a couple of copies of them down in the museum. And anyway, this is me in the hall, right there. You can see this, the door to this room is on the left side there. And that's the door to the Raymond J. Prince workroom there to the right by my elbow. And so that's another little thing that I accomplished as a student. It took me 6 years to take the 4-year program here in graphic communication. Hey, but remember, I took 9th grade twice, so you know, what's the big deal? The idea was that I wanted to stay around a long time, and the reason it took me so long to graduate is that I started a business in my sophomore year, a little company called Tintype Graphic Arts, and I was too busy to go to school. I stopped coming, and you know, I was still enrolled, and I was 2 classes short of graduation. And one day, Mr. Guy Thomas, who was then acting department chair, and I say acting because I think it was a title that was given to him in an interim, and I don't remember exactly the order of people who followed and so on. But anyway, Guy Thomas calls me, he says, "Lawler!" That's how he always addressed me, which is probably why I don't like that when you do that. I've talked to you about that, right? Okay. Anyway, he'd say, "Lawler!" I said, what's up? He'd say, "You didn't graduate." I said, no, I didn't. I kind of forgot to. "Get back over here. You've only got 2 classes." I said, "Okay, so what are they?" Rubber stamp making, not making this up. And interestingly, I was running Tintype Graphic Arts was a typography business. I had never taken typography. So I came over and I challenged them. And in the process of challenging typography, I insulted the teacher, who was a really, really nice man, Mr. James Hutchinson, who was a New York City advertising typographer. Oh man, he was tough. But it was interesting because for those, I'm not going to put an idea in your head, students, but there's a process called challenging a class. You can still do it. You pay a fee to the cashier's office, and then you go to the teacher, and the teacher decides how to test you on your knowledge. The idea is, if you are already trained or an expert in something that you are required to take here, you can challenge the class, and you go. It's called a grade or a examination by challenge, and I don't think it's something like $35. You can do it. Lorraine, do you know what the current fee is? $25 to $35. I had a student do it just a few years ago. She's now one of our teachers, which is quite interesting. Professor Elliott. No. It's just funny that Professor Elliott was the last student I had who challenged the class. And what you do is you go to the teacher, you make a deal. And what I did is I said to her, for example, "I'll give you the final exam, whatever grade you got on that, I'll give you for the class." And it's done. You don't have to take the class. So I challenged rubber stamp making. That was another thing Tintype Graphic Arts did. We made rubber stamps. And I didn't need to take a whole quarter of rubber stamp making to learn how to do that. So I challenged it, and I don't remember who the teacher was, just done in an hour. And then I went to see Mr. Hutchinson about challenging his typography class, and he was mighty insulted. But then we started talking, and he realized that he was sitting with a kindred spirit. And we started talking about type designers and type fonts and how I'd met Hermann Zapf one day, and there's all this stuff. And by the time I left the office, I'd earned an A in his class, and that was the end of that. And I got my diploma, which was quite cool. So, and I'm sorry that I didn't take his course, because I got to appreciate what a fine man he was. And we corresponded by mail until his death about 10 years ago. And he was a sweet man. He was the author of a really wonderful book about typography, which unfortunately is now out of print. Really beautiful book, just a paperback 5x7 size book, really wonderful. Anyway, he was a neat guy. And so I did manage to graduate, and then 20-something years, 30 years later, I don't know, as a result of doing good, I was named the honored alumnus for the College of Liberal Arts. I know there are several other people in the room who are also honored alumni. And I wanted to talk about some of the other things that I've done, that I've accomplished here at Cal Poly, not the least of which is being the advisor to Shakespeare Press Museum. But the one thing about Shakespeare Press Museum that I want to talk about before I talk about this, I don't do much. I do a lot. I rebuild printing presses. I have a shop 10 miles south of town where currently there's a Golding Pearl #3 in the last hours of restoration. It's taken me about 1.5 years to restore it. It's coming back to the museum on Friday afternoon for its public unveiling. And I've restored the Heidelberg, I've restored the linotype, and the most important thing I did at Shakespeare Press Museum was to cull the collection. We had, for example, 4 broken perforating machines. And I don't know why you would need 4 broken perforating machines when 1 broken perforating machine is perfectly good. But then I realized I didn't need 1 broken perforating machine either, so I got rid of all of them. And you can't get rid of things around here. This is a state institution and everything is tagged. So what I did, I learned a new word. In the world of museums and collections, there's this word, deacquisitioning. It means loaning something to somebody for a really long time. So for example, Jerry Hill, right there, deacquisitioned his Smythe book sewing machine to us. Thank you, Jerry. And it's downstairs being restored right now. I was hoping to have it running this week, but I'm not going to make it. But it's okay. It's well on its way. Anyway, over the last, let's just say 15 to 20 years, I've worked to get the museum cleaned up, meaning anything broken, anything that would never work as long as I could see into the future, with a few exceptions, we have gotten rid of. We've deacquisitioned it. It's gone to another museum. Now the museum is tight. Every machine there, almost every machine there works. I've restored everything to a condition where you can walk up, put ink on it, and print with it, which is really cool. We now have 4 of the lever presses that work. The Heidelberg runs, all the treadle presses run. One needs a little bit of maintenance, but again, these are small things. Finding parts for 1885 printing presses can be challenging. So over the years, I've tried very hard to get the museum into a condition where we can be really, really proud of it. Rebecca, would you stand up for just a second? I want to recognize you. Rebecca is the current curator of Shakespeare Press Museum, one in a long line of wonderful, and she has done a spectacular job. She's the one who gets the credit for running the museum. I might get some credit for deacquisitioning, but she runs it day to day, keeps it open to the public, teaches other students how to use the equipment down there. She's a fine example of the wonderful curators that we've had in the museum. And many of them are coming back this Friday afternoon for the reception at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, which is really great. We're going to see some of our old timers returning. So the museum is in really good condition. And by the time that I think by the time that June rolls around, we'll probably have the new Ludlow typesetting machine that Laura Lawton gave us. Is Laura near here? She's part of our advisory board. Laura's company, Lawton Printing in Spokane, donated a Ludlow, which is a typesetting machine, to us. It's been in the building now for 2 years. It lacks electricity, but as soon as we can drop a power line to it, we'll have it running, and then we should be pretty close to having everything in the museum go. The other thing that I've accomplished with Shakespeare Press Museum is that we built the new Bilo bindery behind the museum, which was funded by a really lovely woman you'll meet on Friday evening named Debbie Bilo and her children. Her late husband, John Bilo, was a bookbinder in Ventura, and she called me one day, 3 years ago, October, and said, "Hey, I have this book bindery." I drove down there with a big box truck and brought back her husband's bindery, and we expanded Shakespeare one step back into the storage area behind it, and I built the Bilo bindery, which is mostly work tables, but it's an excellent place specifically designed for students who take GRC 439, book design technology, and where we teach the students how to hand sew and hand bind case-bound books. And so that's the latest addition to the museum. everything about the museum is fantastic. There's the Golden Pearl is coming on Friday. We've got new type. There's a whole lot of really wonderful stuff. So I'm very, very proud of my accomplishments at Shakespeare Press Museum. I will be turning over the control of the reins of Shakespeare to Professor Kenneth L. Macro, effective June. Now, let's talk about other stuff. I decided to show some of the pictures of things that I've done around campus. This is a snapshot that I took of of San Luis Obispo. Cal Poly's in the photograph. This was from my 2014 exhibition at the local Museum of Art called Slow Pano, and it's called a Gigapan. It's a 44 gigabyte photograph of San Luis Obispo taken from Cerro San Luis Obispo above the Madonna Inn. And it takes up 240 degrees or 270 degrees, I can't remember, I calculated it, with the Laguna Lake on the right side, Cal Poly on the left. And it has so much resolution that you can read the numbers on the soccer players' jerseys on the field at Cal Poly, which is 9,000 feet from the camera, right there. And it's extraordinary. It's comprised of 1,500 images that are stitched electronically into a single image. You can read license plates. Oh, oops, I just did the microphone trick. You can read license plates on cars. There are also some really interesting things that happen in these photographs. You get what I call them mismembering. It's like dismembering, except it's not so harmful. Mismembering is where something is in one frame but not in the adjacent frame. So there are mismembered automobiles on the highway in this photograph. There are front halves of cars with no backs, and there are back halves of cars with no fronts. It's really sort of strange. That's odd, but anyway, sort of an amusing little thing. After that show at the museum, ASI approached me and said, hey, we saw your show. The students of the Associated Students Incorporated have agreed to purchase your photo from you and put it up in the University Union on permanent display. So that's what this is. It's a 33-foot version of that photograph. And for those who I have not told, Wenda is in there. Anybody know who Wenda is? She's Waldo's girlfriend. She's in there 3 times. There's a challenge. So I have had students come up to me, total strangers, who say, I can't find the third one. I can't find the third one. I know immediately what they're talking about because it's a torment. But I promise you, she is there 3 times, and you just have to find her. So, and she's dressed just like Waldo. So she's pretty easy to find. Red and white striped sweater and a red and white striped cap. And anyway, and she has a bicycle. So she's she's in there 3 times. Anyway, great fun. And that's one of a handful of permanent pieces that I have around Cal Poly. Also in the Baker building, there's the Mars photo. I did that on a vacation to Mars a few years ago. It's my largest photograph I've ever done. That's 22 feet wide, 14 feet tall, and it's taken from JPL images and then enlarged mathematically. It's an interesting process. But as a result of that, the College of Science and Mathematics hired me to make some additional photos that are on the walls over in Baker Center, including Crater Lake, the Trona Pinnacles, and the Bishop Peak project, which are on the on the Baker Center building. You can see those when you go on. It's a fun tour. Another area of which I'm greatly proud is that Mr. Raymond Prince, who's standing in the back of the room there. Ray, would you wave to everybody? You guys know his name because we always talk about the RJP GAC, the Raymond J. Prince Graphic Arts Collection. That's Raymond J. Prince right there. You've met him now, okay? Thank you. I don't remember what year this was. It's been a few years because I look like I'm 39 there. But there's Mr. Prince in the foreground. He doubles as a stand-up comedian. And no, I'm teasing because that doesn't look like you're very comedic, but he is a really jolly fellow. Anyway, over on our right, here's Dr. Macro, and then Gary Field, and I'm on the other side of Mr. Prince. And the reason that we are standing there was for this publicity photo because Mr. Prince endowed 2 scholarships in Gary's name and in my name. Thank you again. And these scholarships have been kind of slow to get started. I don't exactly know what's kind of caused them to be delayed, but I believe that this year will be the first year that both scholarships, the Gary Field Scholarship and the Brian Lawler Scholarship, will have enough value to fund scholarships for you. And all you have to do to get one of those scholarships is to apply. So apply to the scholarships using, I think you have to do it online now, is that correct? Yeah, you have to do, and mine, I don't know what Gary's is exactly, but I know that in my case, I know that we give scholarships annually to lots of students, and I hope you appreciate those scholarships, and I hope that you apply for them, because sometimes we give scholarships just because we like you. A lot of students have financial need, and I appreciate that. That's very common. But also, there are students who fall into a category like my son, Patrick, who's now 32. When he was of college age, we filled in the FAFSA form and we sent it off. And the problem with many of us is that we're too rich to get a Pell Grant. You can't get free college when you make the kind of money that college teachers get. But we're not rich because we can barely make the mortgage. It's this sort of netherworld of well-offness, which strikes people who have college-age students, and a lot of you are in this category, where your parents are certainly well-off enough to have brought you this far, but affording college is difficult. So what I did with my scholarship, meaning the scholarship that Mr. Prince left in my name, is I wrote it in such a way as to benefit those people in the middle. So if you come from a middle-class family of people who can't quite afford to just write the check for your tuition, but they're not poor, they're not rich, this scholarship is designed to fit you, and that's my intention. So each year, I hope, it earns enough money to benefit one or more students in our department, and it pays directly into your Cal Poly fees account, and it reduces the tuition you pay, and so on. Again, thank you, Ray, for your generous contribution. And the man on the left is Dr. Harvey R. Levinson, the man I mentioned earlier, who was department head and responsible for my being here. He's the guy who called me one day and said, "Hey, we have an opening. Do you think you could come teach just one day a week?" And I jokingly told him years later that it was kind of like the story that your junior high school DARE instructor told you, the first one's free, kid. 2 years later, I was full-time, and Dr. Levinson provided me with employment, which at an interesting time was just after 9/11. And my business, I had gone into consulting, and I was working for Kodak and Apple and a number of others for about 10 years there. And then 9/11 happened, and I was just unbelievably broke. None of my customers were calling, and when I called them, they'd say, "Oh, we can't do anything right now." Well, why not? "Oh, terrorism." Well, I'm not asking you to do anything. I want you to hire me to do something. No, we can't hire anybody right now. Why? Terrorism. Okay, well, how about if you remember that we were going to do a show in China? Remember that? I called my contact at Apple. "Oh, no, we can't do the one in China." "Oh, why not?" "Terrorism." I said, well, I'm going. You're not going. I'm happy to go to China. "Oh, no, we can't do it." "Why not?" "Terrorism." And so my work had just vanished, and Dr. Levinson came in on a white horse, and suddenly I was a teacher. And that was the beginning of my college career, my professor career, sort of roundabout. But anyway, grateful to all of these gentlemen, Ken, Dr. Levinson, and others, who made it possible, actually all the faculty who made it possible for me to be here, and to invite me into this group of wonderful people with whom I teach. The other area of which I'm tremendously proud of my, not so much accomplishments, but my involvement, I'm happy to have been involved, is TAGA. I'm the faculty advisor of TAGA. I don't remember how many years I've been doing that, but a pretty good long time. And these are 4 photos of teams that I've taken to the TAGA conference. I'm sorry, I don't even remember what cities they're in at this point. It becomes a blur after a while. Our advisory board member, Paul Cousineau, former president of TAGA, will attest to this. After a number of years, they're sort of, one conference room in some hotel in some city. It moves from city to city every year. I know that this one down here, and actually I don't know, where was that last year? I can't remember. Where were we? I'm really see, he can't remember. He sort of forgives me for this. Anyway, a few times, there was a long period of time when we didn't win. We won 2 out of 3 years, this last year and then 3 years ago. when Peter Schlosser took my place while I was teaching in Germany. Anyway, the lower right corner was this last year's TAGA book, which won the competition, and we brought home that great big thing, the trophy in the middle, which is called the Kippon Cup, and it's the big deal at TAGA. And our students, led by Lauren Helms, she's second from the left. She was the president last year, and to her left, to our right, is Erica Taylor. Erica, are you nearby? She'll be making a presentation during the club showcase in the next session. Anyway, Erica's our current president. We're getting ready now to produce the book. As always, it's a panic down to the last, I'm sure, hours. We'll be producing the book, which is a journal of technical papers, technical and scientific writing by students, that is put into book form. We take it to the TAGA conference. We compete against other schools. It's an international competition. There's a university from Canada. There's a university from France. And there are, depending on the offerings, 3 to 5 U.S. universities who compete. And every once in a while, when we do the job right, we bring home the big trophy. And that's a subject of great pride. We've had some spectacular students in TAGA, wonderful work that they have published. They've done a great job. And the thing that separates us from the others, and we have one other competitor who is equally worthy, in my opinion, and that's Clemson. Between Cal Poly and Clemson, the students do all the work themselves. They feed the paper, they fold the paper, they glue the paper, they put the covers on. And it's one thing to be proud of the accomplishments of the students, another whole different thing to talk about the accomplishments of the students when they do the work. And again, my hat's off to the students who get involved in TAGA, because they make this whole thing worthwhile. And it's incredible how much work it is. It's also incredible how satisfying it is for me, but that's the greedy part, for the students who can take this with them out into the industry as, you know, a career accomplishment. It's a big deal. And I know from speaking to employers who come here for our career days, they often will ask me a couple of questions. You know, hi, thanks for coming today, glad you're here. And sometimes they'll say, hey, tell me who the UGS managers are. And I'll say, oh, well, there's one over there, and there's one over there, and they're all around. But yeah, here they are. And sometimes I'll take the list of people they're interviewing, and I'll put asterisks next to people. And then they'll say, tell us who the TAGA students are. And I put double asterisks on those. Because these are students who are obviously better prepared for positions in the industry, and the employers are aware of it, and they know about it. And it's a big deal. And while I'm on that topic, there's another member of the audience, Lou Caron, wave to us, who financially supports TAGA in 2 different ways that we are really grateful for your support. He's the director of Printing Industries of Printing Industries of America, Southern California Association, and he's one of the people who have stepped up to help TAGA financially, and we're tremendously grateful. Thank you. It makes it all worthwhile. So, and I know also that there are members of the advisory board, Paul Cousineau, and I think Jim Meckes, who have contributed financially to our success over the years. And every little bit counts. I'm not making this a pitch. I'm just saying these are people who believe in the program, who've invested in the students who are doing it this year, and made a real difference to us, and we're really, really grateful. So with that, my last thought is, not only was I not planning to stay, but I'm not planning to retire until June. So in June, I'm going to pack my bags. No, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to stop teaching in June here in graphic communication, and the department will hire someone to replace me. I hope they have as nice hair. And in September, we'll have 1, maybe 2 new professors, which will be great. And I will still be around for a little while longer, meaning I'm not planning to die right away. But my ex is out there on the floor, and that's important. Anyway, I'll be moving to Munich in January, a year from now, where I'll be teaching at the MUAS to Hochschule München, and I'll be teaching a semester there, after which my wife and I are going to stay the rest of the year in Munich and elsewhere around Europe, and then we'll come home, and I'm planning to be a vagabond. That's when it says occupation, I'm going to write vagabond. I've decided that's really it. And so I'm going to do whatever I feel like at the end of that period of time. So with this, with my newly annotated book and with my act of historic vandalism in the bindery, I'm going to wish you all happy afternoon. Thank you for being my students. Thank you for being my colleagues. I'll see you. Thank you. Oh, cool.
Safe travels to Munich.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you, everybody. I love you. Okay. So I think we have, next up is the club showcase. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Oh, and thank you, seriously, for 20-something years.
You're so amazing.
I don't have waterproof mascara.
No, I don't either.
Students, come back at 10 past, but if you swarm, there's some food left over.
Good guacamole.
You're welcome to have some.
I have a little history on these books.
Yeah.
My dad was one of the first people in Southern California to get a windmill.
Oh, is that right?
1947.
Wow.
And my mom